Greetings, Healthy Voice podcast and YouTube subscribers, Substack readers as well. I am recording this voice note on Saturday morning. I'll probably post it on Sunday evening. So by the time you hear this, I will have already published my weekly newsletter, which is what inspired me to record this. I was going through all of the material I put out this last week, which, by the way, I know it's a lot. And I do that for a reason. I want to put out a lot of content in various mediums, reading, listening, watching. And I've even started upping my Instagram content because I want to reach all different kinds of people who have different styles of receiving information. As a teacher, I have learned over the years that the more you can involve a variety of senses, the more likely your student is to absorb the information. And so some people love to read. Some people can't hold their attention when they read and they prefer to listen. Some people need the combination of listening and watching a person's facial expressions and their body language and hearing the tone of their voice. And that's what YouTube is great for. And some people need to just embody it all. And I'm one of those students. When I decide that I want to learn something, I get books, I get audiobooks and physical readable books. I'll get ebooks as well. And I will find lectures on YouTube because that's where the bulk of my learning style is, in watching somebody speak, like really understanding them as a person. But I love to also have readable content and listenable content. And that's how I learn. And so every week I try to put out as much content as I possibly can. And so as I was going through everything, the articles, the voice notes, and the videos, I kept seeing a theme that I wanted to address. I've gotten some comments this week on the topic of narcissistic abuse, which I've touched on a little bit. And I try to be careful not to use the term, although I'm starting to think I should maybe not shy away from it, because the more I do this work, and we are going into the 5th month of the Healthy Voice platform as it's been launched 5 months ago on YouTube, as I continue to do this work and I continue to read the comments, which I do read all of them, by the way, and I try to respond as much as I can, but I'm getting to a point now where what a nice problem it is to have that I can't always respond to everybody, but I am reading your comments and I'm taking notes all the time. And I'm noticing the sociology student in me is always awake and aware and collecting data and trying to find patterns. And so what I'm noticing in this community is that there's a lot of survivors of narcissistic abuse. And definitely there's other types of abuse in there. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's relationship abuse. But at the core of what I'm seeing in the comments and in my private clients as well is I'm seeing a lot of narcissistic abuse. And so I was inspired to talk about one particular element of this style of dominance and control. And when I was reviewing my own video on jaw tension, and then I was looking at another video about trauma, and then another one about resonance, and all of these videos and articles and podcasts made up a whole theme for the week that made me think of something I wanted to share with you. And so I saved these sort of more personal stories for the podcast because I feel more comfortable sharing with you in this medium. On the YouTube, it takes a little bit more out of me knowing that I'm being watched, my face is being seen. Some things are just too personal for that. And so I saved them for the podcast because the audience is also smaller for these voice notes. You guys, I can tell that I don't know, I feel more comfortable talking to you. I feel like you really appreciate these behind the scenes types of stories. And so I wanted to share with you as vaguely as possible to protect the people involved, because I'm not interested in throwing anyone under the bus. All the people in my life who have ever hurt me, I know that they're human beings and that they are on their own path, and I'm not interested in bringing any kind of revenge in any way. And so I am actually very hesitant to share personal experiences because I have quite a forgiving nature when it comes to people who have uh, whose own toxic behaviors have caused a lot of grief in my life. But there was one particular person in my life. Actually, there were a few, but I'm thinking particularly about one person who really needed me to live in this person's fantasy realm. And this is a common theme that you have when you start learning about the specific consequences of narcissistic abuse. People who are on the healing path in particular will start to notice that they were continuously being lied to. There's a term that I've heard experts use, which is called shared fantasy. And in a shared fantasy, you're basically both living in a lie, and it's a lie that has been created by the person in charge of the dynamic. And this doesn't have to be just two people. This could be an entire family. It could be an entire institution. It can be an entire network of people who are all living by the cues of the person in charge of the narrative. I've seen this play out in institutions, by the way. I watched it play out in church. I watched it play out in my school. I watched it play out in I try to be very careful. I'm not trying to be political here, but I've watched it play out in government, particularly a point in time when I mean, it's happened multiple times, really, but I'm thinking about one specific time when a particular world leader lied to an entire population and was able to actually convince the population to go along with the narrative. I mean, fill in the blank. That could probably go for so many moments, but keep in mind I'm of a particular age. I'm technically Gen X. There was a particular time in my life when I was coming of age when it was like in my face how obvious this occurs. So I think you probably know what I'm referring to. And watching these things play out in the world sphere, in the global sphere, or even the national front, and then watching these things play out in a local religious institution, a local academic institution, even in a small social community of sorts. It could be a friend group, or it could be, yeah, a friend group. That's it. That's the easiest way to put it. I started to notice these things, and then I started to look at my own closer knit relationships. Things that made me uncomfortable about the macro. That's the language we use in sociology, by the way. There's the macro and there's the micro. And so the macro would be like the national stage, the news media, the government, everything that is creating a narrative. And the people involved in that nation are collectively choosing to agree, or perhaps you'll always have some dissenters in the group that are disagreeing, but they don't have the microphones. They don't have the platform, except today is different. Now we do have microphones and platforms, and you can try to speak out, but there's still always this collective narrative. That would be the macro. And then the micro would be your family, your social group, your church community, these smaller groups that have the same kind of dynamics as something on the macro stage. And so as a sociology student, I was paying attention to the macro a lot. I was very interested in that. But in learning about the micro, understanding, I didn't have the phrase at the time, but what you would call an as above, so below, so within, so without situation. I started to look a little closer at my internal, my my localized relationships, and this planted the seed of starting to notice when the narrative was being manipulated. And fast forward about 20 years, and I started to feel brave enough to look at a particular relationship in my life that it was so obvious to me was being manipulated. The narrative was being manipulated by this more dominant force, which I didn't even realize was the more dominant one, because it didn't have all of the character traits of what you would consider to be a dominant force. Most of the time, we think of an abusive person as being loud and aggressive and sometimes violent, demeaning in a very overt, aggressive way, where it's obvious to people. If you were to just, maybe they're not all talking about it, but if you were to find one person to be like, hey, what's up with so and so, insert the name of the group leader. And you may find that they don't want to acknowledge it with you, but you may find the one person who's like, yeah, what is up with this person? Meanwhile, I had a situation in my life where this person appeared very meek, um, not incredibly successful, but able to keep things going, always to keep life going, and in a lot of ways had a sort of a reputation of being a martyr, someone who had been through a very difficult time and came out of it strong. And wow, what a inspirational story you have. Meanwhile, my connection to this person is being manipulated, and I don't want to recognize that I'm continuously having to bend my will and my own personal experience of life as I have lived it, because I have to live in this shared fantasy world with this other person. And if I don't do it, there's always this threat of punishment that I have subtly agreed to, I have subtly consented to over the years. And I'm starting to wake up after about 20 years of this. I'm starting to realize, wait a minute. Okay, maybe this person doesn't yell at me. Okay. Hmm. And maybe I am free to speak my mind openly from time to time. But why is there always this threat hanging over my head that if I don't keep quiet about certain things, and if I don't speak my truth, meaning my perspective of the way things happened over time, why do things happen in my body? Why do I feel my shoulders tighten up? Why do I feel my throat close up? Why do I feel my jaw tense? Why do I feel like I can't say certain things or else this person might blow up? When it seems like I have been free to speak up about certain things, I've been given permission by this person to speak my truth on certain issues, but there's always this one set of proceed with caution subjects when it comes to personal connections that would upset the narrative that this person has created. This script, this fantasy land that this person has created. There's no room for me to go there. And the reason why I had to face it is because it was beginning to set me back big time in my own spiritual journey and my own healing journey. I kept getting to a certain point in my healing process where I would get up against this wall, and I realized that the wall had to do with I can't be honest with this person about the way things have been experienced in my life. It's not like I was trying to force someone to live in my narrative. It was just that I wanted to be free to say the way things happened in my perspective, from my point of view. But what happens when someone has decided to create a new narrative about the way things were, and that is the only narrative that exists. And if you don't feel like you can speak your truth, you start to develop these symptoms of tensing up and holding back in your speech. And I know that I'm being very vague here, and I may have lost some listeners at this point, but if you're still listening, it's because you know what I'm talking about, don't you? And I don't want to be so blunt. I'm not ready to be blunt about this story. And I think that one day I might be, but I don't feel comfortable saying the concrete details. But what I'm talking about here, to sum it up, is being in a direct connection relationship with somebody for over 20 years, and then realizing about 20 years into a particular path of healing that the reason why I keep bumping up into roadblocks on my journey is because I'm not willing to address this dishonesty that exists in my life, because I have made a subconscious agreement to live in this other person's reality whenever I'm around that person. And because I have agreed to live in that reality of that person, I have these moments where I'm not allowing myself to be truthful and honest. And in those moments where I'm not allowed to be truthful and honest, I am left with physical consequences that are directly related to my voice: jaw tension, a swallowed voice, a lack of resonance because of that, tension in my shoulders, a fear response, a fear of being punished by this person because I can't be truthful about my own perspective of life. And so I just wanted to share that with you because that's what I do in these voice notes. And so if you resonated with this, if you get what I'm saying, even though I'm being quite vague, I hope that you understand what I'm trying to get at here. That when you experience narcissistic abuse, you get stuck in what's known as a shared fantasy. And if you continue to consent to being in the shared fantasy, you will start to experience feelings of a blocked voice, these symptoms of a blocked voice, blocked tension. And then if you have left this dynamic, if you have made the decision, the very difficult decision to say no to the person who is forcing you essentially, or coercing you, I should say, into a situation of shared fantasy, which forces you to live in their perspective and forces you to lie and not be truthful about your own perspective. You have left this, but you still feel the residue. You still feel the fear and the symptoms of a blocked voice. I can relate to that. That's what I wanted to share with you. And throughout my path, throughout my journey, I have continued to use these voice techniques that I share with you in the videos and in my healthy voice community, and also in my voice liberation course. All of these techniques, I've been utilizing them a lot throughout my path, and they help a lot. So every now and then, even though I've left behind these toxic relationships, I still every now and then I'll get triggered. I'll something will happen, or I'll be really tired. If I'm really tired, I find that it's hard to keep these old fears out of my psyche. And so what I'll do is I've gotten into a habit of singing when this happens. And so I'll just do some warm-ups. It doesn't have to be extravagant. I'll do some warm-ups, or as I mentioned in one of my articles this week, I started playing the guitar again, which is such a huge liberation point for me. And I will continue to sing more songs on my guitar, because I find that singing songs, particular songs about freedom, liberation, peace, they make me feel better. They help me get through those moments where my body will get triggered by these thought patterns and will start to inadvertently bring me back into those symptoms of a tight throat and a blocked voice. But by doing some kind of a singing practice, I find that I can get myself out of that loop pretty quickly. So that's what I want to leave you with. I hope this inspires you to sing, make sound with your voice, because as I keep saying, I feel that this is the portal out of that chronic tension and those chronic fear patterns When you sing, something happens. And I talked about this in my video about resonance, or it might have been an article, I can't remember. But I talk about the reason why this works has a lot to do with harmonics and music theory. Harmonics, and I talk about this in our sound healing course in the Healthy Voice community. So if you're interested in this, check it out. Harmonics are like a gateway to emotional modulation. And this is also, modulation is a musical term. It's used to describe when you go from one key signature to another. I don't know if that means anything to some of you, but it basically changes the feeling of a song. It usually feels uplifted when you modulate. So when you modulate, a good example is Living on a Prayer. There's this part at the very end where he repeats the chorus, but it feels like you've been lifted up higher. That's a modulation. And harmonics have this ability to do that in your psyche. So you start off singing a song in a minor key, which is if that's how you feel, you're feeling sad. And so I recommend you start singing in a minor key in a sad song. But then you want to modulate to a major key. And so my philosophy of sound healing, this is only my personal philosophy, is that you start where you are. You start in a minor key. Start with a sad song. You got to feel those feelings. But then you got to lift yourself out. So you got to put yourself into a major key somehow. You got to find a song that's inspiring and uplifts you. That's how you get yourself out of that dark dungeon. That's why music is so powerful, because the vibrations, the harmonics, they replicate the human emotional spectrum. And you can play around with that to get yourself out of a dark place. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and get this uploaded so that it can go out to you guys on, what the heck? I'll put it out tonight, Saturday. All right, guys, check out my links. If you want to learn more of my techniques, please check out my voice liberation method and my community. With each passing month, I think it gets better and better. I add more challenges, more content, more opportunities to sing and learn from me. And I'd love to have you in there. And if you're not into community at this point, that's fine. You can do my course, the Voice Liberation Method. It's a self-paced 7-week course. And you're going to learn a lot, because I've put a lot of information, 30 years worth of information packed into a 7-week course to get you started. All right, so I'll talk to you guys later.